May 1944. The Pacific War is a bonfire, and General Douglas MacArthur is about to pour gasoline on it. His entire plan for retaking the Philippines, his entire legacy, hinges on one tiny, God-forsaken island, Biak. On that island, 11,000 Japanese soldiers, led by the brilliant and ruthless Colonel Naoki Kuzume, are not waiting to die on the beaches. They are hidden, dug into indestructible fortresses of coral and rock, armed with machine guns aimed at every conceivable angle. They are waiting to bleed America dry. The U.S. Army is marching straight into this trap, and they are following a doctrine that is getting them slaughtered. The brutal mathematics of the Pacific War prove it. For every bunker they face, they will lose 3 men. There are hundreds of bunkers. But here is the secret. The U.S. Army has a weapon that can end this nightmare. A grenade so terrifying it can melt steel and suffocate an entire garrison in seconds. But it's locked away, forbidden. Using it offensively is classified as a war crime. What the generals in their starched uniforms don't know is that a 10th grade farm kid from Iowa, a private named Harold Moon, is about to ignite a firestorm. He is about to violate every rule in the book, defy his officers, and force the Pentagon to rewrite its own doctrine, or court-martial him for trying. This is the story of the bureaucracy that failed, and the one soldier who dared to be right. To understand the nightmare of Biak, you first have to understand MacArthur's obsession. By early 1944, MacArthur's island-hopping campaign was a brutal success. But he wasn't just hopping, he was driving. Driving toward one objective, the Philippines. His famous promise, "I shall return," was more than a slogan. It was the entire strategic focus of the Southwest Pacific Theater. But to invade the Philippines, he needed air power. Not just from carriers, but from massive, land-based bomber fields. His eyes landed on the island of Biak, off the coast of Dutch New Guinea. Biak had 3 perfect, strategic airfields, most importantly, the MacArthur airfield. Whoever held MacArthur airfield could dominate the skies over the entire region. For MacArthur, Biak was the linchpin. For the Japanese, it was the final firewall. The Japanese Imperial High Command knew its value. They sent one of their best defensive minds, Colonel Naoki Kuzume. Kuzume was not a follower of the old Banzai Code. He had no intention of wasting his men's lives in suicidal charges on the beach. He studied the American landings at Tarawa and Kwajalein. He saw their overwhelming naval firepower, and he devised a new, horrifying strategy. It was called Mokusaku, strategic silence. He would let the Americans land. He would let them come ashore with their tanks, their artillery, their confidence. He would lure them inland, away from their naval guns and into a fortress. For months, Kuzume's 11,000 men transformed Biak. This wasn't a trench line. It was a fortress system built into the island itself. They used the natural terrain, ancient coral caves, limestone cliffs, and dense jungle, and reinforced them with concrete, steel, and overlapping fields of fire. Some bunkers had walls 3 feet thick. Others were positioned in natural coral formations that made them nearly immune to artillery and naval bombardment. These positions were mutually supporting. Attacking one bunker meant exposing yourself to machine gun fire from 3 others. It was a perfect 360-degree killing field. Kuzume's orders were simple. Hold Biak at all costs. Bleed the Americans for every inch. Make the price so high that MacArthur would have to rethink his entire war. The Americans heading for this trap had no idea what was waiting. They were the 41st Infantry Division, the Sunset Division. They were veterans, but they were trained for a different kind of war, and they were carrying the wrong weapon. Meet the Mark II fragmentation grenade, the iconic pineapple grenade. Since 1918, It had been the standard American hand grenade. Its serrated cast-iron body was designed to explode into hundreds of deadly fragments, with a kill radius of 10 meters. In the open fields of Europe, it was devastating. Thrown into a German trench, it was a war winner. But the Pacific was not Europe. The problem first became horrifyingly clear during the Guadalcanal campaign in 1942. American forces encountered Japanese defensive tactics unlike anything they had faced in training. The Japanese exploited natural terrain, digging into hillsides and reinforcing caves. The Mark II grenade, designed for open warfare, was useless. It was too light. Soldiers would throw it at the small firing slits of a bunker, only to watch it hit the coral wall and bounce off, rolling harmlessly down a slope. Or, if the throw was perfect, the 5-second fuse was too long. It gave Japanese defenders just enough time to pick up the grenade and throw it right back out. The failure rate was catastrophic. Field reports from the Battle of Tarawa in November 1943 were a terrifying wake-up call. Marines documented that only 1 in 12 fragmentation grenades successfully entered an enemy bunker. The rest detonated uselessly outside, while the Japanese inside returned fire, killing the assault team. Each failed throw gave the Japanese time to kill Americans. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department, headquartered thousands of miles away at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, knew it had a problem. They were the experts. The scientists and engineers responsible for designing and approving every weapon the Army used. They responded with a flurry of solutions. They developed special grenade-launching rifles. They designed longer fuses to give soldiers more throwing time, which only made the problem worse. They created complex training courses teaching proper throwing angles. None of it worked. The bunker problem persisted. By early 1944, the Army's weapons experts reached a final, fatal consensus. The Mark II fragmentation grenade was the only safe option for bunker assault. The official field manual, FM 23-30, explicitly stated this. Their reasoning seemed sound. Fragmentation grenades had multiple safety features, predictable fuse times, and proven lethality in other situations. More importantly, they were designed to be thrown. The alternative was unthinkable. The M15 White Phosphorus grenade. This grenade was classified as a chemical weapon. It was intended only for smoke screens and signaling. The M15 carried stark warnings in red letters, "Not for offensive use." The chemical inside burned at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It could not be extinguished with water. It ignited anything it touched: wood, ammunition, human flesh, and continued burning even underwater, or inside the human body. Army safety regulations were unambiguous. Throwing white phosphorus grenades into confined spaces was strictly forbidden. The risk of catastrophic burns to friendly forces from splashback was considered too high. The official doctrine was clear. Using white phosphorus against bunkers was a court-martial offense. The Ordnance Department had made its decision. Doctrine was doctrine. The men on the front line would just have to throw better. The stakes of this single, bureaucratic decision were about to be measured in thousands of American lives. The casualty reports were already stacking up. Kwajalein, in February 1944, cost 372 American casualties. Eniwetok, in March, added 339 more. General MacArthur's staff calculated a grim projection. At current casualty rates, the drive toward the Philippines would cost over 50,000 American lives before the end of 1944. And then came Biak. On May 27, 1944, the 41st Infantry Division landed on Biak, expecting light resistance. Instead, they walked directly into Colonel Kuzume's trap. The naval bombardment had done nothing. The coral caves were untouched. As the 41st Division moved inland, the island erupted. Machine gun fire poured from invisible bunkers. Mortars rained down from hidden pits. The advance stalled. The 41st was losing. Badly. The brutal mathematics that headquarters had calculated were now a horrifying reality. For every Japanese bunker eliminated, American forces were suffering an average of 3.2 casualties. The 41st Division identified over 200 fortified positions on Biak alone. The mathematics were simple and horrifying. At current rates, taking this single island would cost nearly 700 American lives. The division's grenade supply dwindled. Quartermasters began rationing fragmentation grenades, 3 per squad, per day. Officers ordered soldiers to use rifle fire and bayonets to conserve explosives. But rifle fire doesn't penetrate bunker walls, and bayonets don't reach machine gunners firing from cave mouths. By May 30th, after 3 days of relentless, bloody fighting, the 41st Division had advanced less than a mile. They had suffered over 200 casualties. Medical corpsmen were running low on morphine and plasma. The official doctrine was failing. The experts were wrong. And Private First Class Harold Moon was lying in the dirt behind a shattered palm tree, watching his 4th grenade bounce uselessly off a coral wall, wondering if there was another way. Harold Moon was nobody's idea of a military innovator. He was not a West Point officer. He was not a weapons engineer. Born in 1,922 inches, Grundy County, Iowa, Moon dropped out of high school after the 10th grade to work on his father's dairy farm. His service record listed him as average in marksmanship and satisfactory in grenade throwing. Before the war, his biggest decision was whether to plant corn or soybeans in the North 40 acres. Moon received his draft notice in January 1943. He reported to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, completed basic training, and was shipped to the Pacific as just another replacement rifleman. He was assigned to Company E, 163rd Infantry Regiment. His job was simple: follow orders, shoot straight, and don't get killed. But Harold Moon had one skill that doesn't appear in any Army manual. He wasn't an engineer, but he understood physics, not through equations, but through intuition. Growing up on a farm, he learned to judge trajectories by throwing hay bales into lofts. He learned to calculate angles by tossing heavy tools to his father across the barn. He knew, instinctively, how objects move through space. On Biak, as Moon lay behind that shattered palm tree, his ears ringing, he watched his platoon sergeant throw another Mark II grenade at the Japanese bunker. The grenade hit the coral wall, bounced, and rolled. Moon saw the problem immediately. The Mark II grenade was too light. It was too round. It was too bouncy. It was designed to fragment, not to penetrate. Throwing it at a coral bunker was like throwing a baseball at a concrete wall. Physics guaranteed failure. Moon's moment of insight came from an unlikely source: a mistake. That morning, during the pre-dawn equipment check, someone in the supply chain had made an error. Mixed in with Moon's standard allotment of Mark II grenades were 2 M15 White Phosphorus grenades, the chemical weapons. The ones marked, "Not for offensive use." Moon knew the regulations. He had sat through the safety briefings. White phosphorus grenades were for smoke screens. Only smoke screens. Using them offensively violated standing orders. But as Moon studied that Japanese bunker and the bodies of the 7 men from his platoon lying in the open, he saw something the experts at Aberdeen had missed. The M15 White Phosphorus grenade was heavier than the Mark II. It weighed nearly 2 pounds, compared to the Mark II's 21 ounces. The fuse was shorter, only 4 seconds, not 5. And the white phosphorus itself had a property that shrapnel didn't. It kept burning. It would fill that enclosed space with choking, toxic smoke and unbearable 5,000-degree heat. Moon pulled one of the forbidden M15 grenades from his web gear. He weighed it in his hand, feeling the solid difference. His platoon sergeant noticed. "Moon, what the hell are you doing? Those are smoke grenades." "They're heavier," Moon said, his eyes fixed on the bunker. "That's not what they're for, Private. Put it back." Moon looked at the bunker. He looked at his dead squadmates. He made a decision that would either save his platoon or get him court-martialed. He pulled the pin. Moon's first throw was perfect. The M15 grenade arced through the humid air, heavier and more stable than the Mark II. It didn't bounce off the coral wall. It dropped straight through the bunker's firing slit, like a stone falling into a well. Moon counted. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. The bunker erupted, not with the sharp crack of a fragmentation explosion, but with something far worse. Thick, acrid, white smoke billowed from every opening. The temperature inside spiked to 5,000 degrees. The phosphorus ignited everything it touched. Wood supports, ammunition boxes, human flesh. The Japanese machine gun fell silent. Moon's platoon sergeant stared in disbelief. Did that just work?" 70 yards to the left, another bunker opened fire, trying to cover the destroyed position. Moon didn't hesitate. He grabbed his second M15 grenade, calculated the angle, and threw. Another perfect entry. Another eruption of white smoke and chemical fire. Another silenced gun. "Get me more of those," Moon told the sergeant. "Those are smoke grenades, Private. We don't use them for. Get me more." The platoon advanced. Moon moved from bunker to bunker, using the forbidden grenades with the surgical precision of a farmer planting seeds. The heavier weight made them easier to control. The shorter fuse gave defenders no time to react, and the white phosphorus created conditions inside the bunkers that made defense impossible. It was a weapon that seared lungs with every breath. By noon, Moon had cleared 8 bunkers. His company advanced 400 yards, the fastest progress they had made since the landing. Word spread through the battalion, whispered over field phones and yelled between foxholes. "That crazy private in Easy Company. He's using WP on the bunkers. And it's working." Captain James Winters, Moon's company commander, confronted him during a brief lull in the fighting. Winters was a West Point graduate, a man trained to follow doctrine. He had the field manual open, pointing to the regulations. "Private, this is explicitly forbidden. White phosphorus grenades are chemical weapons. They're for smoke screens and signals only. Using them offensively violates the Geneva Convention." Moon, covered in coral dust and sweat, simply gestured toward the battlefield, where medics were loading wounded men onto stretchers. "How many of those guys would be walking if I'd kept using the mark?" 2 seconds that don't work. "That's not the point, Moon." "That is exactly the point, sir. This could be a court-martial offense." "Then, court-martial me after we take this island." Winters stared at the private, then at the manual, then back at the battlefield. He was watching his men die, for 3 days, trying to follow regulations that didn't match reality. He closed the manual. He made a decision that would define his career. "I didn't see anything. But if you get yourself killed doing this, I'm not writing a letter to your mother explaining you died violating direct orders." Moon nodded. "Fair enough, sir." By sunset, Private Harold Moon had single-handedly cleared 20 Japanese bunkers using white phosphorus grenades. His unauthorized technique had enabled his company to advance nearly a mile more progress than the entire battalion had made in the previous 3 days combined. The question now was whether the Army would adopt his method or bury him for it. The answer would come 2 days later, in a cramped command tent 2 miles inland. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander McNabb, battalion commander of the 163rd Infantry, read Captain Winters's after-action report with increasing alarm. The report documented Moon's staggering success, but it also described, in careful military language, the systematic violation of weapons regulations. McNabb called an emergency staff meeting. The battalion's officers crowded into the humid tent. Company commanders, weapons officers, the battalion surgeon. Captain Winters presented Moon's results. 20 bunkers cleared in one day. 0 American casualties during those assaults. 400 yards of advance enabled. The numbers were undeniable. Then Major Robert Thornton stood up. Thornton was the battalion's weapons officer. He was a career ordnance officer, a graduate of the Aberdeen Proving Grounds weapons school. He had spent 15 years studying military explosives. He was the expert. And he was furious. "This is insanity," Thornton said, his voice rising. "White phosphorus grenades are not designed for offensive use. They are chemical weapons with unpredictable effects in confined spaces. We have regulations against this for a very good reason." Winters responded calmly. "The regulations assume our standard grenades work, Major. They don't. Not against these bunkers. Then we need better throwing techniques. Better training. We've had better training for 2 years. Winters shot back. It hasn't solved the problem. Moon's technique works. The proof is in the casualty reports. Thornton slammed his hand on the map table. Do you understand what white phosphorus does to human tissue? It burns through skin, through muscle, through bone. It cannot be extinguished with water. If even a fragment of that lands on one of our own men. Our own men, Winters interrupted, are dying right now because we're forcing them to use grenades that bounce off walls. The tent erupted. Officers shouted over each other, arguing doctrine versus results, regulations versus reality. Some supported Winters. They had seen the bunker problem firsthand. Others sided with Thornton. The regulations existed for safety, and one private's reckless success didn't justify abandoning established doctrine. McNabb let them argue for 5 minutes. Then he raised his hand for silence. The shouting stopped. "Bring me Private Moon." 20 minutes later, Private Harold Moon stood in the command tent, still covered in coral dust and mud. He had never been in a battalion headquarters before. He had certainly never been surrounded by this many officers, all staring at him as if he were some kind of alien. Lieutenant Colonel McNabb got straight to the point. "Private, Major Thornton tells me you're using white phosphorus grenades offensively. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Moon said. "You are aware that this violates standing orders?" "Yes, sir." "Then why?" McNabb asked. "Did you do it?" Moon considered his answer carefully. He was a farm kid from Iowa, talking to a lieutenant colonel who held his life in his hands. But he was also a man who had watched his friends die for 3 days, all because nobody questioned whether the regulations made sense. "Sir," Moon began, his voice steady, "the Mark II grenades don't work against these bunkers. They're too light. They bounce off. I needed something heavier, something that would go through the firing slits and stay inside. The M15s are heavier, and the white phosphorus, it makes the bunkers uninhabitable." "It works, sir," Major Thornton interrupted, his face red. "It's also incredibly dangerous to our own troops. If that phosphorus splashes back—" "I'm careful about the angles, sir," Moon said, looking directly at Thornton. "I only throw when I have a clear shot through the opening. And I've been doing this for 2 days, and we haven't had a single friendly casualty. 2 days isn't enough data." Thornton scoffed. McNabb cut him off. He turned to the major. "Major, how many casualties has this battalion suffered clearing bunkers since we landed?" Thornton consulted his notes, his anger fading into frustration. 47. Killed or wounded, sir. And how many friendly casualties? McNabb continued, his voice low. There was a dead silence in the tent. McNabb turned back to Moon. Show me. They moved to a captured Japanese position half a mile away. In front of the battalion staff, Moon demonstrated his technique on an abandoned bunker. He explained the physics, the angles, the timing. He threw 3 M15 grenades, each one entering perfectly through narrow openings that the standard Mark II grenades had consistently missed. McNabb watched in silence. Then he turned to the fuming Major Thornton. Major? Effective immediately. You will authorize the use of white phosphorus grenades for bunker assault. Distribute them to all rifle companies. And get Private Moon to train our squad leaders on his proper technique. Thornton was stunned. Sir! This violates Ordnance Department regulations. McNabb stepped closer to his weapons officer. Then the Ordnance Department can court-martial me. We have an island to take, and I am not losing one more man following regulations that get them killed. Meeting dismissed. The results were immediate and dramatic. Within 24 hours, every rifle company in the 163rd Infantry Regiment received supplemental supplies of M15 White Phosphorus grenades. Private Moon, the 10th grade dropout, became the most important instructor in the battalion, moving between companies and demonstrating his technique to squad leaders. The training was simple. Identify the opening, calculate the angle, throw the heavier M15, not the Mark II. Take cover for 4 seconds. The battalion's casualty rate didn't just drop, it plummeted. Field reports documented the transformation. Before Moon's technique, the 163rd Infantry averaged 6.4 casualties per bunker eliminated. After adopting white phosphorus, that number dropped to 1.7. And most of those were from enemy fire during the approach, not from the assault itself. The casualty rate for bunker assaults fell by 73%. The technique spread like wildfire through the division. By the end of May, the entire 41st Division had adopted Moon's unauthorized method. The Japanese noticed the change immediately. A diary recovered from a dead Japanese officer, Lieutenant Takeshi Yamamoto, described the new American tactics with sheer terror. He wrote, "The enemy now uses chemical fire weapons against our cave positions. The white smoke fills the tunnels and makes breathing impossible. The heat is unbearable. Men cannot stay at their posts. This is a terrible weapon that defeats our strongest defenses." The ultimate test came on June 2nd. The assault on MacArthur airfield. This was the strategic objective. The Japanese had ringed the airfield with 68 fortified bunkers, creating overlapping fields of fire that made the approach a suicidal death trap. The 163rd Infantry, now armed with Moon's technique, drew the assault mission. Moon, who had received a battlefield promotion to squad leader, led his men. They advanced across open ground. When machine guns opened up from 3 concealed bunkers, Moon's squad went to work. Moon reached the first bunker, pulled an M15, checked the angle, and threw. The grenade entered cleanly. 4 seconds later, white smoke erupted. The gun fell silent. The second bunker was more difficult, the firing slit smaller. Moon had to expose himself to get the angle, ignoring the bullets snapping past his head. He threw. Another perfect entry. Another silenced gun. His squad cleared 3 mutually supporting bunkers in 11 minutes. Before his technique, that same task would have taken hours and cost multiple casualties. His squad suffered 0 losses. Across the battlefield, other squads employed the same tactics. The 163rd Infantry cleared the airfield perimeter by 2 p.m. An objective that staff officers estimated would take 3 days was secured in 8 hours. The final statistical analysis was undeniable. The 41st Division's after-action report compiled in July 1944, proved Moon's case. Before White Phosphorus, 47 grenades expended per bunker, 3.2 casualties per bunker. After White Phosphorus, 2.3 grenades expended per bunker, 0.8 casualties per bunker. The 41st Division eliminated 312 Japanese bunkers on Biak. Using the old casualty rates, that would have cost approximately 998 American casualties. The actual casualties were 249. Harold Moon's unauthorized technique saved an estimated 749 American lives on Biak Island alone. His method spread throughout the Pacific. The 1st Marine Division used it on Peleliu. The 96th Infantry Division used it on Okinawa. Field manuals were quietly revised. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department never formally acknowledged that Moon's technique worked better than their approved methods. The manual never mentioned Moon by name. It never admitted that a private with a 10th-grade education solved a problem that weapons experts couldn't. But the production numbers tell the real story. In 1943, the U.S. military produced 2.1 million M15 White Phosphorus grenades. In 1945, production reached 11.2 million. The official documents still classified them as smoke. But everyone knew what they were really for. Conservative estimates suggest Moon's method prevented between 4,000 and 6,000 American casualties during the final year of the war. After the war, Harold Moon returned to Grundy County, Iowa. He took over his father's dairy farm, married, and raised 3 children. He never gave interviews. He never talked about the war. He received the Silver Star, but he kept it in a drawer. But in 1982, at a 41st Division reunion, an elderly man approached him. He was the son of Captain James Winters, Moon's old company commander. "My father passed away," the man said, "but he told me to find you. He kept a list of every man in Easy Company who survived the war. He calculated that without your technique, at least 47 of them would have died on Biak. He said you saved his company. He said you were the bravest soldier he ever commanded, because you had the courage to be right when everyone else was following orders that were wrong." Harold Moon died in 1998. His obituary mentioned his military service in one sentence. His legacy isn't in medals, it's in the thousands of men who came home because one private decided that saving lives mattered more than following regulations. He saw a problem. He saw the solution, and he had the courage to act, even when the entire world told him he was wrong.